Welcome back. We are in Senior English 8. And our objective now for the hour is to work with what we will call the King James Version of the Bible. Now, you should have your hymnal open right now to 296, 297. The anthology that we work with is, of course, an introduction to British literature. And we now turn to a volume that one or two of us maybe know a little bit about, but from maybe a religious perspective, right? So for example, maybe as a child, you were asked to attend certain kinds of religious activities where the term, the Bible, was referenced. Maybe for some of you, the only exposure to this book is that once you were in a hotel room and you saw, as you often will see, that this volume will sit in some drawer or on a table or on a nightstand in one of these rooms. And it will often reference as the Holy, H-O-L-Y, Bible. And so for you, maybe this is for you an introduction to a volume that you've often wondered. If you go to a hotel room or to a library or to a bookshelf and you pick up this book called the Bible, what are you looking at? I'm going to help you to understand that. But I'm also going to make the point here that we're not going to talk so much about the religious value of this book, although we could. We're going to rather talk about the literary and linguistic value of this book. Now notice I use two terms there that you want in your notes. Literary value and linguistic value. Along with Geoffrey Chaucer, who we consider to be the father of the English language, we will call the 1611 King James Version of the Bible that high moment in English language, not just literature. Language, literally the way we talk English, the way we speak English, has a lot to do with this text that we're about to talk about. But to do this, I've got to first talk about what is this book that we call the Bible. And what I find fascinating is the number of seniors who will report, after my 15 minutes of this comment, whoa, I guess I never knew that. I always heard about this book, but I never really knew what this book was. When I go, for example, and I just pick this thing up, I don't know, let's just call it that you're in a hotel room, and there it is lying there. When you pick up that book and you open it, what are you looking at? Now, I'm not talking about religiously what are you looking at. Literally, what are you looking at? What is this volume that we call the Bible? Well, let's say a couple of things about it. One, for your notes. One, it's what we call an anthology. Now, what is that word? Well, I use that word often when I reference your hymnal. What is an anthology? A collection. That's the word you want to write down. A collection of different types, or we could use the academic term, genres of writing. So, for example, when you pick up the Bible right away, you're going to identify there is a multiplicity of different kinds of texts. I mean, first it'll all look the same, but it's not. It's not like you're picking up a novel, for example, and reading. That's not what this text is at all. This text, for example, has some poems in it. It has some short stories in it. It has some essays in it. It has interesting lists of all different kinds in it. It has all kinds of dietary laws and rules, depending on what part of this book you pick up. With that in mind, then, we want to understand that this is a book that is compiled over a long period of time. That is to say, it's a work of history that's going to predate anything 1611 by a large number of years. Okay? Number two, this book is a product of different language families. Okay? When you pick up the Bible, you are almost always looking at it in translation. It was not originally a book in English. It was rather originally a book in 3 languages. We want them in our notes. 1, and for the most part, the book is written in the original language of Hebrew. For reasons I'll get into in a moment on my whiteboard, there's a big reason for this. Much of this book is referenced as a book of the Jewish people. Another name for the Jewish people is the Hebrew people. They spoke a language called Hebrew. Okay, so that's the first language. The second two languages are more about the second part of the book, what is often today referred to as the New Testament. The first part of the book is what we call the Old Testament, and that is written in Hebrew. The second part of the book, the Bible, is called the New Testament, and there we have two languages, Greek and Aramaic, which is kind of slang Greek, okay? These three languages then will comprise what we call the Bible, okay? By 1611, remember now our dates, Shakespeare will write and perform the play Hamlet on the stage 1600. Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492, 8 years from 1500, 100 years prior to 1600. So you're starting to get a kind of sense of our timeline here, okay? By 1611, the great King of England, James, has decided that he wants to standardize, and that's the word you want to write down, standardize the English Bible. There are Bibles that have been translated out of the Greek and the Aramaic, out of the Hebrew, into first Latin. That Vulgate translation becomes really an important translation because much of the translations into English come out of that Latin translation. And there are a number of English translations already by 1611. But James I wants to authorize the standard translation of the Bible. And so he calls for a group of scholars to do so. They produce their volume in the year 1611. And in that moment, what James does, without really realizing it, is he standardizes the English language. In other words, if you want to read or write or talk in the English language after 1611, you use the language of the King James Version of the Bible. It even becomes called the authorized version of the Bible. Got me? But because everybody in England is Christian, everybody is aware of this single volume, this translation of the Bible, which is why people start to talk and sound the same from that point going forward. Do you got me? Okay? Now, what is this volume? Where does it actually come from? Now, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are, of course, religious people that will say the Bible comes from God, and we won't get into the debate about the truth or the validity of that idea. What we are going to talk, though, more about is where literally does this story even come from? Now, I am a bad map maker, that is to say, a cartographer. I'm really bad, and I'm not the artist in the family either. But if you'll watch my whiteboard, I'll kind of give you a little sense of the history. I'm going to do it in about 5 minutes. Sorry, I'm going to cover a lot of ground really, really quickly. But there's a little bit of background here that will help you to understand. When you pick up the Bible, what are you picking up? Well, in terms of the Old Testament, you're talking about a story. It's quite a remarkable story, and it covers a lot of time. But let me give you the high marks. Now, this is what we will call a coastline, and this is the Mediterranean Ocean, okay? And then what we're going to do over here is we're going to have a couple of rivers that you're maybe familiar with called the Tigris and the Euphrates River, okay? And then in an area right here that we today know of as Baghdad, you're probably familiar because a war got fought there, right? Okay, back in the day it wasn't called Baghdad, of course it's called Babylon, right? Okay, you can understand the close similarities between the two. There is a story that will be told in this book about a guy named Abraham, and he will take a journey that will begin right here, and it will travel all the way up, and then down to a place that today we refer to as Israel, what often was called the Promised Land, okay? And so Abraham takes this journey and he goes there, all right? Ultimately, Abraham's lineage or progeny will become people who live in this area. But ultimately, those people have to come down into Egypt. You're probably familiar with the Nile River and all of that. They end up down here in Egypt, because of a great famine. They end up staying there. And these people were told in this book called the Bible, this people grow into a large number of people. Okay? And you're probably familiar with a book called Exodus, which is the second of this Bible, that tells the story of a guy named Moses, who takes these people and they leave Egypt after a large story about plagues and lots of people dying. They ultimately leave and they go out here into a desert where they walk around for a number of years, and then ultimately, guess what? There they are, back again in this same place called the Promised Land, later to be called Israel, where they build a famous city. It's going to be sitting right there in the southern part of Israel, still there today. That famous city is called Jerusalem. You're right, Jerusalem. What makes Jerusalem such a famous city? And by the way, Jerusalem has another name for your notes. Jerusalem has another name. It's going to be important to read, for example, one of the songs of this book called the Bible, Psalm 137. It has another name. The name is Zion. Okay? Because Zion is the name of a mountain. Jerusalem is built on a hill. Okay? So that you can defend it. Ultimately, though, what happens in this famous city is that a famous temple gets built there. Got me? Now, what's significant about that temple? Because these people, known as Jews, believe that God dwells in that, or lives in, that temple. In a very special part of that temple, called the Holy of Holies, is supposedly where this God lives. Well, what's fascinating is that this city, Jerusalem, is the city of kings. And for a period of years, everything goes really well. We have three great kings. First, a guy named Saul. Then a guy named David, who's a very famous king, and then his son Solomon. Okay? But something interesting happens. First, in 721. All right? By this point, Israel has divided because of a civil war. And in 721, the Assyrian nation comes in and attacks the northern tribes of Israel. Are you ready for this? Takes everyone away, leaving only the southern tribe and the city of Jerusalem. In 721 this happens, okay? The Assyrians are a brutal people, and they never allow these people, these Jews, to ever come back again to Israel. Never. Got me? 586 is the second date you're going to write down. This one's the more important date for our discussion. 586, Babylon will attack Jerusalem. This is a big deal. They put the city under siege. It's a bad situation. So bad that in the city of Jerusalem, you actually have people eating their own children to try and stay alive. That's how bad the siege is. It goes over a period of time. Ultimately, two things happen. Huge. One, the city falls. Those Babylonians, they get inside this city, okay? And in that moment, they destroy the city of Jerusalem. They also destroy the temple. They literally walk in, they devastate the temple, this holy place, right? Which you could then raise the question, wait a minute, I thought God was like living inside that temple, and the temple gets destroyed. That's code language for possibly some people to ask, maybe God is dead. Yeah, dead. Right? Because the temple gets destroyed. In other words, wait. God is in the temple gets destroyed. Where is God? But wait, I'm not done with my story. Watch my whiteboard. The second thing that happens is that these people leave and they are forced to walk from Jerusalem to Babylon. It would be like this. I've been teaching this way for a while. It would be like this. This afternoon you go home and you're in your house and all of a sudden guards show up. They speak a language you don't know, but it's pretty obvious that if you don't do what they're kind of gesturing you to do, everybody gets shot. And so you and whoever's in your house gets let out by the Bighorn River, and the whole town of Orland is there. Several people try to fight about this, and then just a bullet gets put in their head, and you kind of figure out, oh, okay, I guess we're going for a walk. And you come to find out two things are about to happen. One, we're going for a really long walk. This walk will take us all the way down to South Denver. So we're going to walk all the way to South Denver. Along the way, let's just call it out loud what it is. Along the way, the old people all are going to die. The children are all mostly going to die. The only people that are going to make it down there are the somewhat strong people. And by the time we get down there, there ain't going to be as many as left. Would you agree with me? But wait, I'm not done. The walk is only the first part. When you finally get there, this is what we call, for your notes, exile. That's right. This is huge. Exile. Exile means you're stuck in another place and you ain't never coming home. You're never coming home. Okay? So in other words, these people watch their city get destroyed. They watch the city walls be devastated. They watch their special holy temple destroyed. And then they have to walk all the way, many of them dying. And by the time they finally get here, they're told, you're never going back. This is what we call, for your notes again, exile. What to do? That is an important question. What to do? This is an amazing people, these Jews. They have an amazing history. But at this moment, in 586, the thing they do that's so important is that they decide to collect all of their stories. All of their texts start to be compiled at this moment. These special texts will, of course, become the first 5 books of what we call the Bible, and lots of other texts as well. Like, for example, the Psalms. Only they don't call it songs, they call them psalms. Right. Psalm means song. Same word. Now, hello, just to finish my little history, and then we'll look at these texts, just to let you know. Hurrah! About 50 years later, guess what? Those people that are living in Babylon, they're allowed to come home, back to Jerusalem. Now, they don't know this in 586, but they actually do get to come home. Why? Because the Babylonians are conquered by a people called the Persians. And the Persians say, let's let them go back to Jerusalem. So they do. They come back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the city. They rebuild the temple. And a few years later, remember, we're talking 586 before Christ. A few years later, a baby is born in a small town outside of Jerusalem. That town is called... Right? Why is that child born in Bethlehem? Because the mother and father, Mary and Joseph, live north in Israel, and they have to go down to Bethlehem. Why? Because the account tells us the Romans are requiring that there is a count, a census. Romans, why are Romans living here? Well, in the time that's passed, the 500-year since, no longer is it the Persians that run the world, but guess who now runs the world? The Romans, right. Of course, before the Romans, there were the Greeks, correct? Okay, and so we have this storyline of finally when Jesus Christ is born, he's born in Israel, but the Romans run the show, right? Okay, now what happens to Jesus Christ 33 years into his life? He is, of course, crucified. Where? Where is he killed? In what famous city? Gee, I wonder. Right? See how this works? He's killed outside of Jerusalem on a hill called Golgotha. They kill him there. They crucify him. And then guess what happens 40 years later after his death? Rome destroys the city of Jerusalem. They do this over and over again, right? It's kind of the nature of the city, right? And guess what? Lots of the people living in Jerusalem, guess what? They get exiled. You got me. Okay, the city of Jerusalem, you can visit it today. It continues to be an amazing city in the history of the world. That's our story to kind of set up. Why is 586 so important now for your notes? Well, that's the beginning of this anthologizing of these texts, this collecting of these texts. These texts then, well, what are they? What do they even look like? Well, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Now we'll work rather quickly out of your textbook. And we'll take a look first, actually, at page 300. Now, the story I just told you helps you to be able to read Psalm 137. Again, this is one of those songs that gets written in 586. Written where? In, what's the town? What's the town's name? Today we call it Baghdad. Back then they called it Babylon. You got it, right. So this town, this famous city of Babylon, these people are brought there. They're forced into exile. And then, are you ready for this? They're told to sing songs about their country. In other words, it would be like us taking that walk down to South Denver, and the people who live in South Denver are speaking an entirely different language. They've never seen this place. And they go, "Where are you from?" And you go, "Well, we're from Worland." "Really? Tell us about Worland." "I don't want to tell you about Worland. It makes me sad." To tell about Worland makes me sad because the last thing we saw of Worland was it was completely flat. Because when they came in, they flattened the entire town of Worland. Everything that was here was blown up. So it was flattened. And then we had to walk out of that place, and they told us we're never going back. Take a look at the poem. "By the rivers of Babylon," what two rivers? Right, the Tigris and the Euphrates. "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion." Zion, what's Zion? Zion's Jerusalem, right. Why did they weep when they remembered Zion? Right, because they had been led away from the city. Read the second verse. "We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they wasted us, and they that wasted us required of us mirth," happiness, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." In other words, they made fun of them. The Babylonians made fun of them. "Ha, ha, ha, you had to walk away from your famous city. Sing us a song about your famous city." Notice they say, "We don't want to sing any songs about the city." How come? Because they're really sad. Look at the next line. "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" See, this makes total sense, right? Where are they stuck? They're stuck in Babylon, right? We don't want to sing a song about where we came from, Zion, Jerusalem, because we're stuck in a new land. "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy." In other words, they'd like to go back to their home, to their city of Jerusalem. "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it," that means lower it. Raise it even to the foundation thereof." Whoa, look at the next lines. "O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones." Whoa, what did you just read? Boy, we're going to be awfully happy when these Babylonians get jacked the way we got jacked. And I hope that what happened to us happens to them. What happened to us? The soldiers took the heels of the little babies and swung them around and bashed their brains out on rocks. Whoa, what did you just read? I told you, this is an interesting book. I often will say to my students, "Dude, you ought to pick this book up and just read it. It's a fascinating read." Why are they so angry at the Babylonians? What do they hope happens to the Babylonians? The same thing that happened to them, namely exile. Are you ready for this? Guess what? The Babylonians did get attacked, and they did lose. They did lose, of course, to the Persians, as we know, right? Okay, and the Persians did some pretty nasty stuff to the Babylonians, right? It's the nature of war. Now let's take a look back one line to Psalm 23. It's another psalm. This is a famous one. The 23rd Psalm, we often reference it. It's often read at funerals, interestingly. Some of you maybe have heard this psalm, but you just didn't know that it even came, what was the history of it. Are you ready for this? These people who lived here in Jerusalem, they were predominantly, many of them, sheep herders. They took care of sheep. Okay? So it will maybe make sense that you have a reference here to being taken care of like sheep are taken care of. Take a look. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That means I don't need anything. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul." Now wait a minute, what's up with this TH at the end of all these words? Do you see it? He maketh me to lie down. He leadeth me beside... What is this TH stuff? By the way, some of you that are raised in religious settings that are Christian will say, "I read from a Bible, but Psalm 23 doesn't have that TH on the end of it. It just simply says, 'The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not need anything. He makes me to lie down.'" What's up? Why is the TH there? This is the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, right? All of the translations in English that you're reading, of course, are a product of changing to some degree the language That will be the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, right? What is with the TH? It's about rhythm. So, for example, go back. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Do you see the rhythms? All right, a lot of it is iambic, just like we've been looking at the poetry, right? He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk, yea means even. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What is the house of the Lord? No. What's the house of the Lord? I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What is that? It's the temple that was built where? In Jerusalem. What happened to the temple? It did. It got jacked by the Babylonians, didn't it? Notice the line. I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is, again, maybe a hope for a return, right? And this psalm is going to be read in very hopeful ways that maybe someday we'll get back. Of course, they did get back, right? Let's take a look at the famed Sermon on the Mount. Now, for your notes, this one on page 301, this one is a larger sermon spoken by Jesus Christ, who was a Jew, born in Bethlehem, raised North Israel in a place called Nazareth, where at the age of 30, he spent 3 years walking around and teaching. Ultimately, he becomes a considered criminal, and he is crucified outside of Jerusalem, okay? Before he dies, he has a group of people that follow him, namely 12 of these people. They're called followers or disciples. And after Christ dies, in the 50 to 90 years after his death, there are things written about him. These writings become known as Gospels, and 4 of them are going to appear as the first 4 books of this thing we call the Bible. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, supposedly, these are the ones that wrote these volumes. And notice here, we are working then with Matthew chapter 6. That is to say, the first of the 4 Gospels. Now, at no point in any of the 4 Gospels, does the name of the author actually appear. Where, for example, Matthew says, I wrote this, or anything like that. This is all kind of attributed long after the fact, okay? Do you got me? But notice in this sermon, Jesus Christ is going to say a couple of things. No man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon here means what? Does anybody know? What's mammon mean? Can't serve God and mammon means you can't serve God and money, right? Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, nor yet of your body, what you shall put on. Is not life more than meat, and body more than raiment? Life is about more than what you eat or what you wear, in other words. Behold the fowls of the air, the birds. They sow not, neither do they reap. In other words, they don't have to go and punch in a clock, and look, God takes care of them. Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his stature? You can't make yourself grow taller. And why take ye thought for raiment, clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Look at the beautiful flowers on the mountain in the spring, for example. Notice he says, and why take ye thought for your clothing? Consider the lilies. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory. Who is Solomon? One of the 3 famous kings of Jerusalem, who of course built that famous temple that we were talking about. Wherefore if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you of little faith? All right, now the last story I'm going to spend the rest of my time with. You'll want to write this in your notes. This is what we call the prodigal son, okay? Or its extended title, the parable of the prodigal son. Now, first of all, let's start with the word parable, because you're going to hear this one on the exam. What is a parable? You know what this word means? What is a parable? It is a story with a second meaning. Write that down. It is a story with a second meaning. All right, a parable. A story with a second meaning. All right? Now, this is an interesting story. I'm sorry I don't have time to read it with you, but we'll talk about it. Let's give a brief plot summary at level 1. This is a story about 2 brothers. The younger brother, by the way, they come from a wealthy family. The younger brother comes to his daddy and says, you got bank. The dad says, I do. And he says, I want you to give me $10 million because I want to leave home. And the daddy says, well, I was going to give you 10 mil, but I was going to give it to you later when you're older. And the son says, give it to me now, I want to have a good time with it. The daddy says, all right. So the young kid takes his 10 mil, he goes down to Vegas, and he spends his 10 mil on pole dancers and strippers. He has an amazing time. I mean, unbelievable time. Partying. He has lots of friends until he doesn't, because he runs out of money. He spends all of his 10 mil. He ends up living behind the club, next to the dumpster. In the story, he ends up doing the worst thing that it can imagine for any Hebrew, and that is working, feeding pigs. Pigs, swine are considered unclean by Jews. He's so hungry that he ends up having to eat out of the dumpster. That is to say, to eat the food of the pigs. And while he's doing this, he goes, you know what, this life sucks. I should just go home, back to my dad. Maybe he'll let me at least live out back of his house. Because I know obviously he's going to be way mad at me because I blew my 10 mil. We're told the next part of the story is fascinating. He comes home and his daddy is waiting for him when he shows up. His daddy, however, is not mad at him. His daddy is happy that he is home. And he decides to throw a huge party for the kid. No kidding. He decides to throw a big party for the kid. Meanwhile, the older brother has been out working in the fields. He is a hard worker. He's got work ethic. He comes home, he's like, dude, what's up with the party? I hear like noise. Great news, your bro. He went to Vegas and blew 10 mil on strippers, and then he came home. All the money is now gone, and your dad's happy he's home, so he's throwing him a party. And the bro's like, some of you can appreciate this. Whoa, what are you talking about? He went away and blew 10 mil on strippers in Vegas, and now he gets to come home and they throw a party? Nobody ever threw a party for me. I've been here the whole time working hard. The older brother is really upset. When he confronts his daddy says, what are you upset about? I've always been good to you and taking care of you. Your bro went away. We thought he was like gone for dead. Now he's back. Let's throw a party. Let's have a good time with him. End of story. Now let's point out a couple of things about this story. Would you agree with me? This is a very interesting story. Let's ask some questions as we finish at 3b. Okay? How this story is understood or interpreted is, of course, multi-leveled. Let's ask a couple of questions, though, about it. One, do you think it's a good idea? These are 3B questions. You can write them down, and you can think about it on your own later. One, do you think it's a good idea, if you are a parent of money, to give money to your kids without them earning it? No. See? So, for example, do you think it's a good idea to go out and just buy your kid a new vehicle? Or are you more of the persuasion kids should work hard and buy their own vehicles? Number two, if a kid gets money from you and then goes out and blows it, right? Blows all the money, and then comes back home and asks for more money. Are you inclined to say, let's throw a party for this kid? Or are you inclined to say, you made your bed, now lie in it? Right? Do you think his dad has been a good father to welcome his son back without any kind of punishment? Or are you inclined to say, this is what it means to be a parent? You got to love your kids even when they screw up. Number three. See, these are questions you can write down and give some thought to on your own. What about the older brother? Are you inclined to say you kind of understand his response? Let me ask it this way. Do you think it is inevitable that when a parent has two kids, the parent will inevitably play favorites? Do you think the father is playing favorites here? Do you think he's showing some favoritism to the younger boy as opposed to the older boy? Do you think it's inevitable to play favorites? Now, of course, be careful here, because if you say all parents have to play favorites, you may set yourself up for the potentiality that someday you are a parent, and does that mean you will have to choose between your kids which one is your favorite? Question next. Which is more difficult? To be the favorite or to be the other one? See, some will say, way harder to be the favorite, because all of the jealousy happens towards You. Yeah, because you're the favorite, right? Others will say, are you kidding me? Listen to the story. Dude, he can blow 10 mil on strippers and still get more money. It's way harder to be the guy who's not the favorite. Next question. Which is harder, to be the older in the family or the younger? Notice the older boy is the hard worker. The younger boy is the, woo-hoo, let's go party. Which is harder, do you think, to be older or to be younger? Or, some will say, no way, the hardest one's to be the one in the middle. Right? Harder to be younger or harder to be older? Finally, how do you interpret this story in regards to throwing the party? Good idea, bad idea, the subject of a lot of debate. By the way, what's prodigal mean? The guy who went away and came back home. Right, the guy who went away